How you guys doing? It's Anthony Gangi, and we're going to continue our discussion on criminal justice reform and changes that have occurred in New Jersey in the past couple of years. Now, if you guys didn't get a chance to, last week we started discussing the trend of the reduction of recidivism. Bob Ricardella, he is the president of the New Jersey chapter of the ACA. He has led this discussion. He's also part of the fight, part of the mission. But I'm actually giving the interview reins over to him because he's more familiar with the topic, and I'm actually finding this very informative, so I want to learn. He also got us this wonderful guest who was on last week. His name is Todd Clear. He's author of The Punishment Imperative, as well as a college professor for criminal justice at Rutgers. So again, thank you both for coming on the show. I know you guys are extremely busy. It looks like it's a week for you, but it's actually within the next couple of minutes for us. So, Bob, thank you for getting me a wonderful guest, and it's your show.
Okay, terrific. In the last session, we sort of laid out the groundwork of where we were in New Jersey in criminal justice, where we are now. We've had great successes as far as lowering our prison population. We've lowered the real crime rate, the recidivism rate, but we have a lot more work to do, because as we lower the population of our prison, the people left in prison tend to be more violent, and they are the ones who are more of a risk to the citizens of the state of New Jersey. And it's going to be very difficult work, and I'm very glad that we have Todd Clear here, who is a professor at Rutgers, but he is working on a project right now. He's doing a new book on violent felons. So this is a great discussion. So having said everything that we said in last week, where do we go with violent criminals? What can we do to change them, to get them to stop, and to make society safer?
So let me start with a couple of things. First, let me say why it is that the proportion of people incarcerated in New Jersey for violent crimes is increasing, and that may seem like there's a problem with violence, but in fact it's because so many of the people who are convicted of crimes that are not violent crimes are being handled in another way, and it's also because back in the 80s and early 90s in New Jersey, we increased dramatically the length of stay for people convicted of violent crimes, particularly repeat people convicted of a second or third violent crime. And those people are stacking up. Instead of serving 8 years, they're serving 18 years. And so they occupy a much larger proportion of the prison population. But it's the same people who would have been out earlier. They would not necessarily have been back in. But the point is, the reason why those numbers are so large has to do with policy, not violence. The second thing I would say is that I think we, as a nation, I know I do as a person, think of violence as a uniform or a unitary idea. You know, the word violence suggests certain kinds of things to us when we hear it. And we think of, the quote, violent criminal, close quote, as being a particular kind of person. Much of that, however, is a stereotype. So, for example, if what we carry around in our heads, even if we're not necessarily aware of this stereotype, but if what we're carrying around in our heads is somebody who is gratuitously harmful, who's to really push the stereotype, is sitting back behind a bush waiting for someone innocent to walk down the street so he can jump out of the bush and hurt him, right? That kind of person. It turns out that kind of crime and that kind of violence is extremely, extremely rare.
You mean random violence?
Crime in New Jersey have a quite different story about how they got involved in a violent crime than just, I was waiting for a victim to come along so that I could hurt them.
But random violence, you're saying, somebody
The second point I would make is that I think in order to begin to approach good policy about people convicted of violent crimes, we have to start complicating up what we think of when we use the word violence. So this goes all the way from, a guy who was selling drugs who carried a gun, to a person who beat up a drug dealer to steal some money, to a couple of people who were playing a card game and smoking dope and drinking beer, and they had a fight, to some folks in a bar who looked at each other the wrong way, to young people who are in the same gang affiliation who get in an argument. I mean, there's just lots of different circumstances, and we don't when we think of it as someone who we should be afraid of, we don't really give proper due to the rich variety of circumstances that lead to a violent crime. So I think the second policy strategy here is to get more complicated, not to stay simplified.
Well, can I ask if that's
sure.
right? So we're talking about the motivation behind the crime, correct? So I know Bob was trying to mention random, and then you're mentioning stuff that actually may have, like two people having an altercation inside a bar, could have stemmed from somewhere. You know what I mean? Could have stemmed with them, you said, looking at each other wrong. So is there a difference between, again, like a random crime, like you mentioned, and a crime that may actually have its roots in something that's not random, just maybe motivated?
So let me, again, I'm going to give a long answer to what is a short and straightforward question. That's what I guess professors are supposed to do.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
The proportion of people who are serving time for violent crime can be divided into two large subgroups. People who are serving time for their first violent felony crime, and people who have done previous violent felony crimes. So in the first group, one of the things we know, so in New Jersey we've not done a lot of studies of this, but there have been a number of studies done on national samples. So to the extent that what's true in New Jersey, in the U.S. more broadly, is also true in New Jersey, these are things we can say. That for the first group, rates of recidivism are relatively low, certainly lower than a random sample of people released from prison, and the rates of recidivism for new violent crimes are actually quite low. But that's a group that often is in their 40s or 50s. The crime was pretty heinous. The sentence was very long, and they spent a lot of time in prison, and they're much older.
And they age out, we call it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to come back to this issue of age in a minute.
Yeah.
The second group, which is people who have multiple convictions for violent crimes, when they're released, their rearrest rate is very closely mirrors other people who are being released with multiple convictions, not for violence. So they're not necessarily higher risk than people who've done 2 felony bits for non-violent crimes. The risk of new arrest might be about the same. The risk of a new arrest for violence is slightly higher, but not a lot higher. That's, for example, true of sexual assault. That's true of homicide. That's true of a lot of different kinds of violent crime. So that the elevated risk for them for new violence is not dramatically different than somebody who had never been served had been multiple convictions for felonies, none of them violent. So again, this word violent criminal here, what it really means substantively in terms of policy is hard to grasp, because they look so much similar. I want to say this about age. The big marker here is roughly mid-30s. I had a great colleague of mine, Shad Maruna, who has studied people in reentry for about 25 years, used to say jokingly that we still don't know of a treatment program better than a 35th birthday. So age is a big deal here. So if you've got a bunch of people serving time for violent crimes in their 40s and 50s, their collective risk to society is quite low. That doesn't mean it's zero, mm-hmm. but it's quite low compared to people serving time in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
And then one more point, and then I'll stop my criminology.
And we'll go into the sociology.
Yeah.
There's been about 3 new studies, recent studies in the last 5 or 6 years, that suggest that a 7-year period clean on the streets is a turning point period. So if I'm clean 7 years from my last arrest, my likelihood of being arrested is no different than anybody else my age. So one of the things here is to say, look, if a person's in his or her 40s, and you can let them out and get them clean, keep them clean for 5, 6, 7 years, you're talking about a citizen who can do well without any kind of criminal justice involvement at all, compared to everybody else.
Who can move on.
We've not really been thinking about those kinds of things very well when it comes to people convicted of violent crimes.
So how do we program people who are long time incarcerated for violent crimes, for those heinous crimes that you were speaking about earlier?
I'm going to use a very bad cliche here. There's no magic bullet. I know that's a bad.
No,
cliche
and we know that with addiction. We know addiction is.
So the word risk is very important here. Risk is just simply a probability that something is going to happen. Low risk, it can be 5%. High risk, it can be 50%. Right? And so what we're talking about here is a group that is not that will as a group you can identify the subgroup that will be low risk, and you can handle them and get them involved in reentry programs that are successful. But the problem is there won't be zero risk. There will be people in that group. If the group's large enough, if it's 100, let's say, 5 people are going to commit a new crime. So the risk problem is one thing. The public stakes problem is another. Those 5 people are going to look like they should have been let out, right? Even though you let 100 people out and only 5 got involved in a new crime, from a standpoint of a citizen, people are going to say, "Well, why'd you let any of those guys out? Because 5 of them got a new crime." So this is a public policy immaturity, because there is no 100% successful public policy anywhere when it comes to human beings. Nothing that guarantees you'll get an education. Nothing that guarantees a person's going to get a job. Nothing that guarantees a marriage will work. Nothing that guarantees a person will stay out of trouble with the law. There's nothing that is a 100% guarantee other than the mortuary. So we as a society have to get more sophisticated as a policy society to recognize that it's not about guaranteeing a safe nation. It's about managing the risk in a way that keeps us as safe as we can possibly be. So that means early interventions when you see problems. That means a lot monitoring. That means taking into account a person's age, a person's prior criminal history. But all those things matter, and they matter way more than the actual fact of the person's one previous violent crime.
If they have one crime, but quite often in prison you see people who have a propensity for violence. They go from their default setting is violence.
Well, if I may,
that is absolutely true. There is a subgroup of people serving time for violent crime who have multiple violent convictions, and multiple violent convictions into what you would think of as middle age, 40s and 50s, and that's a different category of person. And it is. Again, I would quote my friend Shad Maruna, who says everybody can change, but there's no guarantee about that people will change. So the paradox we find ourselves in is that there may well be people who have those patterns who will never commit another violent crime again if you let them out. But it's not easy to know who they are, and the rate, if a person has 2 prior violent convictions or 3, the likelihood of another one, if you release them from prison, is much higher than if it's only 1.
You know what I wanted to ask? I actually, what I noticed here, and a lot of people may not know this out there, but the correctional system has been pretty good in identifying behaviors that are based on addiction. So what I mean by that is when you have crimes on the street and the crimes are based on the person, like you can see at first maybe they're doing petty burglary to support a habit, and then eventually it gets aggressive, and maybe they may commit something extreme to support that habit. And I noticed that the correctional system has done very well in getting programs that look at all that, make a determination: is it the addiction that controlled this person, or does this person just have a mindset for violence? And they've been able to figure out the best of both worlds and really suit the needs of the individual in question. So again, a lot of people don't know that, but corrections really does a great intake and decides what that person needs right from the get-go, right when they come into a state facility.
I think that our ability to identify the kinds of interventions that a person can benefit from has great greatly improved in the last 20 years. So here again, I want to draw the distinction between batting 1,000 and having a good batting average. So there are no this is human behavior, and there are no perfect assessments, there are no perfect predictions, and there are no perfect programs. So what we're trying to do here is get better on the average,
because this is a risk business, and we know that. If you're in this business, it's a risk business. There is no, when you come into work every day and you deal with people, that this is not 100%, where you're ever going to have anything 100%. But I think part of what you're saying is that we need to do a better job at educating the public as to what's going on with violent criminals, because there are these, there is this perception of what a violent criminal is. And you're saying it's not exactly that.
And wait, can I add something on that?
Yeah.
May I add something, Todd?
Let me say something.
Okay.
So there's a large number of people in the New Jersey prison system who engaged in violence as relatively young men, 19, 20, 22, 23, right? And in those age groups. And they're now in their late 30s, early 40s. That is a group whose continued incarceration ought to be questioned. Whether there's a public policy benefit for keeping them in prison. I'm not saying there isn't for every one of them, but I'm saying that for every one of them, we should be asking ourselves the question: what is the benefit? What have they shown during their incarceration period? What is the benefit of continuing to lock them up compared to the benefit of giving them, of letting them be released, become parts of their families and communities, and contribute back to society? That's not 100% on any of those dimensions, but it is a much higher rate than we ordinarily think it will be, and it's something that is incumbent on us to say we need to have a process and a policy capacity to be able to treat those people differently.
Okay.
Right, if I may say, but we're also, part of that discretion is what they're in. I want to make sure the audience knows part of that discretion when you evaluate that is what they're in for to begin with, correct? I mean, you don't want somebody that matures in prison, but when they were on the street, they really did something heinous, and now we're planning on letting that person out because they, maybe they had the perfect record inside the prison. But this is where the balance is. I know right now corrections has focused a lot on rehabilitation, and I feel, being in the correctional realm, that there is got to be a balance between rehabilitation and safety and security. But in my thing, the universal precaution of safety and security, it kind of trumps rehabilitation to the point where we can only rehabilitate if the facility itself is controlled and we eliminate the possible threats to the environment. Like if you have an inmate that's acting out, you have to have a place to put that individual so you can continue with the proper programming. So when we talk about the program, and people, I just want to make sure the audience knows that there's always going to be that effort, 100%, of making sure whatever we do is safe and controlled, correct?
It is not possible to run good programs in prisons unless those prisons are safe places, and unless people who are in those prisons feel safe.
And that was the key.
Absolutely. But also, I think some of the problems of trying to get violent prisoners back out on the street and to get them to lead regular, normal lives is the same problem that we're facing with all the people incarcerated, and a lot of Americans today, by the way, who are not trained for jobs, lack of education, all those things hit the prison population, really hard. And by the way, they're hitting a lot of Americans hard today. There's a lot of displacement because of technology, and now we're looking at robots and artificial intelligence. How do you see that playing into the whole scheme of things moving forward?
Well, I do. That's exactly right. And regular outside of prison society has trouble keeping up with the changing pace of technology. You can imagine what it means for a population of people who are incarcerated. We at Rutgers University, we have people who take college courses in prison and then come, when they're released, become students on the Rutgers campus, and the technology learning curve for them is enormous. They haven't been doing internet. They haven't been doing library research papers on the computer. They haven't done emails. They don't know Blackboard. So for people who are incarcerated for a decade or longer, the society has changed so much that the transition is an extremely delicate one and needs to be handled effectively.
Well, if I can add, in the systems now, I mean, especially in Jersey itself, you're going to see a lot of effort being put into programming that helps them transition, helps them embrace technology if need be, vocational training, if you will. So we're trying, I believe the system is aware that it is a main concern, that you have people that have been locked up that may be behind on the times, but I promise you that there are efforts made, not just in Jersey, in other states as well, that have tried to move forward thinking, like kind of push forward stuff that can help the person adjust.
And one of the bright spots on the job market is that I think America as a whole, as a country, is starting to realize that not everybody can and should go to college, and that we need to have more training for people in technical jobs and things like that. And I think that would greatly benefit the prison population, because that would be they could sort of just meld into what's happening in the rest of society anyway.
And there's so the idea that there's lots of kinds of talent, and not all of that talent is
absolutely
improved by college, but it's a very good one. And I think it is true that there's lots of need for people to do work that includes not just physical labor, but also thinking labor, and not all of it needs a college degree. So finding ways, so again, the concentration of people released in New Jersey go to a handful of cities. Those cities can use those people as talent, but organizing the communities to receive them in a way that they become contributors rather than users is very important. And again, it's not everybody's going to fit into that pattern, but the ones who do should be able to should have a pathway.
And I tell you, I do want to give a shout out to Rutgers University for their program with the prisoners, because in my day job I have witnessed a lot of prisoners who have gone through your college program and have turned their life around and their thinking around, because we're trying to get them to change their thinking and see the world differently, that crime isn't the option. And Rutgers has done a great job by reaching out to these young people and bringing them into the college system. And because I think a lot of the people that we see in prison are there because they don't see any other path for themselves except for the streets. And they see that as the logical progression of their life, as where a lot of other kids, they grow up, they go to high school, then they're going to go to college, then they're going to go to get a job with a company, and that's how their life actually works out. These other young people see nothing but the streets, and Rutgers has done a great job in empowering those kids.
Well, if I may, Todd, real quick, he brought up a good point. There is something else I actually like a lot too, is that there are some college courses that are offered in the prison that literally the students from the outside come into the prison setting and take the classes with the inmates. And there is something positive here, because I've stood at a few of these graduations, is that it lifts up the myth on both ends, okay? Like, inmates sometimes believe they're not welcome in society, and this says, no, you are. You did your time, you're welcome. And then there's the other end where the students may not understand what the system's like, so they get to meet people firsthand who can actually tell them, listen, what you heard, it's not 100% truthful, let's tell you what it's like. And it kind of just, it embraces a great perspective, I think is really positive in moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate both of you saying those things. These programs have helped, I think, the people inside who've taken them, the students who've gone to them from the campuses, and also, they made Rutgers better too. We're a better university because of the classes and because of the students who've come out. When Barack Obama was our commencement speaker a couple of years ago, 10 students graduating that year took their first college course in prison. So this is a way in which the goals of both the university and the prison system and the community converge.
Actually, speaking of here's another thing, if I may. I have a lot of people that are retiring from the field of corrections and becoming college professors, and I believe Rutgers is one of them that's embracing experience and education. And I think that's the new trend in education, correct? You're trying to bring people from the field so they can kind of mix experience with education to our future leaders?
There's nothing better than people who have touched and tasted the way the world actually works, teaching students about how the world actually works.
Yeah, I agree.
Not just, because I know the professors are fascinating and interesting, but they get a little taste of the real world too. Outside of the classroom is probably a good thing.
Yeah, but you know what? Can I just say something? Just the way we're going, I think corrections has moved forward a lot. I mean, we're coming down to our last few minutes, but corrections was totally warehoused and rehabilitation, and now you're starting to see the balance of both. And I believe we're going to see that in our lifetime. I think I'm going to see that in my career. And then it's funny, again, education-wise, I think, we're starting to see that also, the experience and the education background coming in. I really think that plays into both worlds. I think it's great when people, are taking classes and they actually don't just get academia, they actually get real life application. So then that could actually wind up revising a lot of textbooks too, because you're talking about, academics, but you're also talking about real world application. So I really think corrections overall is heading in a very positive direction. I would just like to see, and again, I do fight for my people. I fight for the people that work the front line. I do think that we do have some concerns, and maybe one day I can bring you on and we could discuss concerns like understaffing and just classification issues. I mean, we've had riots, and if I may, we recently had, everybody knows about the riot in Delaware, but we recently had a riot in North Carolina that led to the death of 2 correctional staff and possibly 2 more, which we'll find out. They're in critical condition, and there's fights for changing, and the changes are general issues that actually are affecting a lot of facilities, especially in the lower, especially in the south, southern regions of the United States, and maybe a little out west. But I would love to see if we can talk about, in our next episode, possible criminal justice reforms that can kind of start with staff and work its way through the population, because we're not isolated from each other. If you do good with staff, ultimately you're setting up a great atmosphere also for the inmates, because we're connected. And I would love to see your ideas, because your book is amazing, I'm sure, and I'm sure what you talked about, I've learned so much today. I would love to see on our next show your perspective on good criminal justice reform that can help the system out, and also, if I may, better incentive to get the right quality of people. Right now they're hiring in desperation, and it's more about quantity over quality. So I would love to see what you feel is needed to get the right person to walk next to me if I was on a tier. And I just think your information was just phenomenal. And Bob, I know we got to come to a close. Do you want to say anything in closing?
Nope. I just want to thank you for appearing on this program. As Anthony said, the insight has been fantastic. I hope you do well with your new book. You're up in Whitefish, Montana?
That's right.
Are you actually doing any fishing or anything like that, or?
No, but there's snow on the mountain above us, and maybe when the bears go to hibernate, I might do a little skiing.
Okay, terrific.
Do you have anything you'd like to say in closing to my audience?
This is a great conversation. I'm happy to be a part of it. Thank you for asking me to do that.
Thank you, and take care. You be safe, and I'll see you on again very shortly. We'll have you on again.
Great.
I take care, sir.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
That's we got down like to a minute, but I just want to. What a great guest!
Yeah.
I just want to tell you. Well, we got last minute left. I just want to tell you what a great guest. And I believe, and I've been doing this a lot lately. We need the middle road. I believe that right now. I believe that there's people on extreme left and extreme rights, and I believe that if we can have a balanced conversation, right, and move that conversation into the middle. You know what I mean? Like right now, it's you're either on this side and you're against everything. You're on this side and you're against everything. That's not the case.
And people are speaking over each other and not to each other. I think the great news for New Jersey, and I think you saw it with Professor Clear, is that we're innovative and we're moving ahead. The rest of the country seems to be stuck and has the same old paradigm. We've broken it. We're moving forward. We're taking some measured risks in some of the programming and some of the things we're doing, but I think we're clearly headed in the right direction. I mean, I know some people today would want you to think that we're in a state of crisis and that that things are horrible, but I really think that things are headed in the right direction in New Jersey.
And that's why we have a conversation like this, just to kind of go against the myth, but also to open up that middle ground dialogue. Because at the end of the day, as we're moving forward to one end with prison reform, I just want to make sure that my audience is aware that we're not forgetting about them, and they're involved, and they're a big part of that prison reform. But I'm thinking that if we kind of see where one side is going, because they're moving in a positive direction for themselves, I want to see where we fit in as staff.
Well, that's why NJACA is really important, because we represent everybody. We represent Department of Corrections staff, parole staff, probation, the county jails, the wardens, the providers, the people who are actually out there doing the programming, who are getting people to change their behaviors, because changing behavior is really difficult and it's hard. But when you do it, then you can lower the prison population, the crime rate, and the recidivism rate.
Right, and as people know, that there is no catch-all solution. That's why we need that middle ground. And organizations like the NJACA, they really try to get the message out there about who we are, the role we play, and they also provide so much for us to kind of step up and get involved and be part of the team. And that's why I have no problem being on the board as an executive member, I believe. And
we love having you, Anthony.
I love being part of it. So I want to thank you for a wonderful two-part show. You saved me work for the next couple of weeks.
Terrific.
Thanks,
you, brother.
Bob. Thanks, guys. Be safe as always, guys. The cage is closed. Here, talk.